This
Meeting is
Hello, and welcome to another wonderful, exciting, action-packed travel back in time as we head back to that decade of Exodus, the 1980s. And we are the 80s kids. We are your host, Kyle Lentz, and with me is Donald Brown, my co-host. Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Welcome. We are missing Rich this particular interview. He'll be back for the rest of the show, but he's going to at least join us again and talk a little more about the remainder of the week and some of the other events that occurred. This week in particular, we do have a pretty exciting week, for me at least, because we're talking about probably, in most cases, everybody has like a favorite movie, top movie. This is probably the week where I'll probably talk about one of my top favorites, if not, definitely my top 5 favorites of all time. This is a movie that I have seen, I can't even tell you how many times, countless times. A movie I saw in theaters countless times when it was out. So we're actually traveling back this week to the week of June 19th through 26th of 1988. So the summer of 1988. Here we are, just finishing in school, and we're heading into the summer. And what an exciting week to start with, because we are going to see the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was one of the greatest films of all time. And to join us today to talk about that is the creator of Roger Rabbit himself, Mr. Gary K. Wolf. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Hey, how you doing? It's nice to be here. Geez, everybody talks so highly of that movie. I think I really ought to go out and see it sometime.
You probably should. I can imagine you've seen it so many times.
It is funny because when it first came out, especially, all of my friends wanted to see it with me. Granted, I only had 3 friends, but I saw it over and over and over and over again.
Oh man,
with all my friends. But I think if you know the movie, it is a movie that you can revisit time and time and time again. And every time you see it, you will see something different. I mean, I was there when they were making it, and I watched scenes where I was standing behind the camera, and I still see stuff I didn't see before.
It's an incredible collaboration of so many wonderful, talented people. That was a movie that was probably made at the right time with the right group of people. It just there's nothing about that movie that doesn't work. It's just from beginning to end fantastic.
I was just talking to somebody today, one of my yoga instructors actually, who came running in and said, "Oh my goodness, I just saw your movie," and I saw it for the first time, and I said, "Well, how'd you like it?" She said, "It was fantastic. It was amazing. I can't believe I've never seen it before." I said, "Well, did you stick around for my credit?" She said, "Credit? No, where was that?" I said, "Well, it was at the end, so you got to go back and watch it again."
You got to stick with it again.
But the one thing that I told her that alludes to what you just said, what helped to make that movie so good was that everybody involved in it was an artist at the top of his or her profession at the time. The animators were top notch. So many of those animators went on to become directors, writers. Of course, Zemeckis was at the top of his form. Spielberg was at the top of his form. Bob Hoskins was as good as he's ever been or will ever get.
Absolutely.
And the interesting thing about it is that people enjoyed making that movie. They really loved kind of going to work in the morning and working on that movie. And they enjoyed it so much that they didn't really want to stop. The movie was not totally finished until I think probably 2 weeks before, when was it, June 9th, when it actually came out. They were still working on it 2 weeks before. And I suspect that if they hadn't had some kind of a deadline, I think they'd be working on it still. I think they'd still be going to work every day and working on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. To be honest with you, the credits alone are amazing, but this movie has the distinction of probably doing something that no other movie before it did and ever will again. And that is teaming up Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse, Daffy Duck and Donald Duck. You will never see that ever again, ever.
Well, never say never. I've learned never say never, but kind of a few interesting sidelights to that. When Disney was trying to make that movie back in the 80s, from 1980, when they bought the rights from me until 1985, Roy Disney went to Warner Brothers and said, hey, we're making a live action animated movie, and we would love to have Bugs Bunny do a cameo. So how about if Bugs Bunny comes out, says, what's up, Doc, eats a carrot, says, ain't I a stinker, and walks off. How about that? And Warner Brothers looked at Roy Disney and said, get lost. There's no way that Bugs Bunny is ever going to be in a Walt Disney picture. That is just never, ever going to happen. So that was 1983. So in 1985 or 6, Steve Spielberg went to Warner Brothers and made the identical request. Hey, we're doing this live action animation. Do we have Bugs Bunny for a cameo? And Warner Brothers says, of course, Stephen, of course. And what about Porky Pig? Don't you want him? And Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner and Tweety Bird and Sylvester and take them all. Yosemite Sam. Don't forget Yosemite. So he got them all, and he did have to pay a rights fee for them, but it was next to nothing. I mean,
it's like $5,000 a character.
I could have paid that out of the proceeds of my paper route. The only requirement placed on Disney and Stephen, there was one requirement, because Bugs, being a cartoon superstar, had an agent, and Bugs's agent negotiated a contract. Bugs was the only one who had a contract. And Bugs's contract said that Bugs had to be in every scene with Mickey Mouse because they were co-equal superstars. So you could not have Mickey Mouse in a scene by himself. Bugs had to be there with Mickey every scene. And not only that, they had to have the exact same number of words of dialogue. So the next time you watch it, you see they are always in the scene together. And they have the exact same number of words of dialogue. You can count it out.
Amazing.
Another interesting sidelight, and again, I've watched this movie 10,000 times, and I constantly find out stuff I didn't know. And I just found this out only a couple of months ago because I was on a panel with one of the animators, and he happened to be the animator who did all the Warner Brothers stuff. He was responsible for the Warner's characters. So Warner Brothers told Disney, we know this movie is set in 1947, but we want our Warner Brothers characters to be the 1988 Warner Brothers characters. We don't want them to be the 1947 Warner Brothers characters, which are different, especially Bugs. Bugs is really different in 1947 than he is in 1988. So the Disney animators who hated Warner's with a passion, I cannot tell you, the fire of 1,000 suns. So they said, okay. So the guy who was doing the Warner Brothers characters did 2 versions. He did one version with the 1988, actually 85 characters like Warner Brothers wanted. He did another version with the 1947 characters like Disney wanted. They showed the 1985 version to Warner Brothers, and they put the 1947 version in the movie. And Warner Brothers did not know that until the movie came out, and Warner Brothers blew a fuse. I mean, they were livid, but because the movie in that first year alone grossed $750 million. They suddenly realized that they had untapped a source of hidden gold here, that they could start selling plush characters and sweatshirts and T-shirts with the 47 characters on them, as well as the current 88 characters by that time. So they wound up relatively happy, although that Warner Brothers, a Disney guy who animated that, got fired. So it wasn't a totally good ending. But just one more little anecdote, because these are the kind of things that you'll never see and nobody will ever tell you. But when Mickey and Bugs were parachuting down together with Bob Hoskins as Eddie Valiant. As I said, the animators really hated Warner Brothers. So in that scene, there's something called gags in the margins. And a gag in the margin is a film goes through the camera at 24 frames a second. And animators back in the early days, Gertie the Dinosaur, Oog and Moog, I mean, early days of animation, they found out that they could screw around with 6 of those 24 frames. So that's 6/24ths of a second, which is too fast for the human eye to see. But if you look at the film frame by frame, you can see it. So animators started putting in little gags, and most of them are profane, but I guess all of them maybe are profane. Anyway, so the animators wanted to put a gag in the margin in that scene where Mickey gives Bugs the finger. Okay. Now, the animation studio was set up for Dick Williams, who was the lead animator. And Dick was an American expatriate living in London. And so he was using Disney animators, but for this project, Disney just didn't have enough animators to do all the animation that was required. So Dick brought in animators from all over Europe, a lot of former Soviet bloc countries that had kicked their animators out. There's no work for animators in Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia, something like that. So Dick brought in a lot of talented people from a lot of countries, and the animation studio in London was a little like a United Nations. If you wanted to talk to the guy from Croatia, you had to talk to the guy from Spain, you talked to the guy from Greece, you talked to the guy from France, you talked to the guy from Croatia, right? And then it went all the way back around. So the guy who was doing that scene where Mickey gives Bugs the finger was, I think, from Yugoslavia. I don't know, but it got lost in the translation. All right. So if you watch that scene now, frame by frame, so you can see the gags in the margin. You can do this easily on a laser disc. Just slow it down and watch it frame by frame. You will see that instead of Mickey giving Bugs the finger, it is Bugs who gives Mickey the finger, which was entirely the opposite. Made Warner Brothers very happy if they ever.
Oh, I bet.
But not what we intended.
Right. Well, that's what. Yeah, I read about the where they use the Bob Clampett designs over the current designs, and just had mocked up those current designs instead of the Warner Brothers. I thought that was a great way to just.
Yeah, and I never heard that story, so it's news to me. There's still things I probably don't know.
But from my understanding, like, because as you know, as we're saying, I know Zemeckis was really adamant about having a specific look and feel, and he wanted those Bob Clampett looks when he went forward.
He was Bob Z was very precise about the characters and the time frame, especially. But this is one of the things that I paid close attention to when I wrote the book. Because you have to set up your rules of the world, and your rules of the world have to be pretty specific to the world you're creating. And you cannot violate those rules. Cannot violate them. If you violate your own rules and do something in your book or your movie that is inconsistent with the world that you've set it in, then your audience or your readers completely lose their sense of belief, and you've lost them. So Bob Zemeckis was very, very careful to adhere to the rules of the world. Cartoon characters could do cartoon stuff, humans could do human stuff. He only violated it twice. Once, everybody who was involved in that movie in a major way, Stephen went out of his way to make sure that his or her favorite character was in that movie. So Hoskins was Heckle and Jekyll. Dick Williams was Droopy. And Bob Zemeckis was the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. But the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote were 1948 characters, not 1947 characters. And they pointed that out to Bob Zemeckis. And he said, well, they would not have existed in 1947. He said, they're my favorite characters. Use them anyway. So director's prerogative. The other thing, and of course nobody argued with him about that, because you'd have to be a real animation geek to say, oh my God. Although there are those people, but we didn't think that was very good. The one that people did argue with him about, and actually it went all the way up to Steve Spielberg, and Steve Spielberg said, you shouldn't do that because that's a violation of the rules of the world. When Bob Hoskins is in the elevator with Droopy and the elevator falls and it hits the ground floor and you look inside and Bob Hoskins is all squashed up on the floor like a pancake, a major, major, major violation of the rules of the world. Major, because he's a human being and he could not do that. And not even in Toontown could he do that. And everybody tried to argue Bob Z out of it, but again, director's prerogative. He said it's a funny gag and I like it, so they left it in.
I mean, I could think there'd be a fan theorist that says, well, maybe Eddie Valiant was actually a cartoon, just like the judge was.
Well, I've heard them all. I've never heard that one, but could be. Makes as good a sense as anything. I don't know.
And I think you could argue too that Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner could have been living in Toontown. They just didn't get their series yet.
well, see, a lot of people have asked me, and I actually just got a slew of comments in the last couple of days. How could Tinkerbell be in this when Tinkerbell wasn't invented until 1959? And there were a couple other characters who said, well, they didn't make their appearance until 1957. But my response to that is that these are all actors, actors and actresses, and they're just all kind of hanging around Toontown, and they're waiting for their break.
Exactly.
And this movie was actually made in 1985, and it was just a period piece set in 1947. So all these characters were there. Nobody ever questioned Roy Rogers singing cowboy in a movie made in 1950, set in, I don't know, the 1880s, where he gets off his horse trigger and sits down and plays an electric guitar. I mean, nobody questions that.
That's true. That is quite true. But let's kind of steer back to the original story that you wrote, the book. Now you wrote the book came out in what, 1980 or was it 81?
The book came out in 1980. Yeah, and kind of an interesting story because I had a 4-movie deal. I mean a 4-movie deal. I wish a 4-book deal with Doubleday, and they allowed me to write any book I wanted in the science fiction genre, science fiction. So I wrote Killer Bowl, which is still my most popular science fiction novel, A Generation Removed, and The Resurrectionist. And for the 4th novel, I wanted to do something that incorporated the 2 loves of my childhood, which were comic books and cartoons, and noir mysteries. All things. I was a big reader of mysteries and noir mysteries, and not easy relating those 2 concepts. And so I was sitting there in my living room one Saturday morning watching Saturday morning cartoons, for research, as I used to tell my wife, just purely research. And I became fascinated not by the cartoons, which were pretty simplistic and not very well done compared to the cartoons I remembered from Warner Brothers, Tex Avery kind of stuff. Pretty simplistic. So they really didn't interest me. But what did interest me were the commercials, because I saw cartoon characters like Tony the Tiger and the Trix Rabbit and Captain Crunch and Snap, Crackle, and Pop, who were talking to real kids, and nobody seemed to think that was odd. And I said to myself, what a great premise for a book that would be. What if cartoon characters were real? So I spent a year researching cartoons and the kind of conventions of cartoon characters, both in cartoons and especially in comic books and comic strips, which fascinated me more for a book, because in the book, the characters are stars of comic strips and comic books, and they don't speak in words, they speak in word balloons.
Right.
So when Roger Rabbit speaks, he puts up a word balloon, and you don't listen to him, you read him. And if he turns around, then his word balloon turns around. So you either have to learn to read in reverse, or you go around to the other side of him. And if somebody gets shot with a tuned gun, it produces a bang balloon. And you can then collect that bang balloon and you got to be careful because they're flat and very brittle, like a china plate. But if you find the gun that you think committed the crime, you produce and have it fire it and get another bang balloon and compare the two bang balloons. And if they match the gun. When somebody in Toontown plays the piano, the notes come out in a string of notes, and people collect those strings and cut them up into 8 by 12 sheets, and that's where sheet music comes from. So, I was able to use a lot of really interesting stuff to me that I thought was just a lot of fun to play with, and use it in the book. Years later, when they tried to make the book into a movie, cinematically, they tried to use word balloons, but that just doesn't work. It makes it into a silent movie. So that really was not a good thing for the movies, but it was a great thing for the book. So I produced this, and did this book called Who Censored Roger Rabbit, introduced my private eye, excuse me, Eddie Valiant. I named him after my father, and sent it into Doubleday as the fourth book of my 4-book deal. And for the first time in my writing career, I've written out 200-300 short stories and 4 novels. Never had a reject. And for the first time in my writing career, I got a reject. They rejected Who Censored Roger Rabbit. So I went to my editor and I said, Sharon, why did you reject this? This is clearly the best thing I've ever done. She said, oh, I agree. She said, well, I thought it was hilarious. It's funny. And it's just brilliant. She says, nobody's ever done anything like this before. And she says, that's why I had to take it to the marketing department to get approval. And it was the marketing department who rejected it. So I called up the marketing department, head of marketing, and said, Chuck, why did you reject my novel? I've been doing pretty well for them. 3 science fiction novels, all on the science fiction bestseller. I was like, why did you reject this? And he said, we all thought it was pretty funny, but there's no category for it on the bookstore shelf. I can't sell this book. He said, it's not a regular science fiction book. It's not a fantasy novel. It's not a regular adult book. It's not a children's book. It's not really a traditional mystery story. There's no category for it. I can't sell this book. I said, all right, what would you do if somebody today gave you Alice in Wonderland or Gulliver's Travels or The Wizard of Oz? What would you do with those? And he thought for a moment. He said, I couldn't sell those either. So I went to my agent. I said, Bill, what are we going to do here? I said, if I can't sell this, I don't want to be a writer anymore because this is what I want to do. He said, no, don't worry about it. He said, we'll find it a home. So he started sending it to other editors and other publishers. And it kept getting the same exact response. Editors loved that book. They loved it. But when they sent it to the marketing department rejected it. We can't sell this book. No place on the bookstore shelves. So along the way, it got 110 rejects. 110 people rejected that book. And you used to get them in the mail, and now I guess you get it by email. I don't get that many, but yeah, I guess you get it by email. But in those days, they came by mail. And my wife used to call my trip out to the mailbox every day the daily disappointments, because I'd go out there and I'd come back with, a fistful of reject slips. And finally, the book landed on the desk of a woman named Rebecca Martin, who was a senior editor at St. Martin's Press. And Rebecca had edited a major bestseller for them. And so the head of the publishing company, the president, gave her a vanity project. And he said, look, for your next project, you can publish any book you want, whatever you want, whatever tickles you, you can publish it. And just at that time, Roger Rabbit came across her desk. So she read Roger Rabbit. This is it. She took it to the president, laid it on his desk, and said, this is the book I want to publish. So he said, okay, I'm going to read it. I'll read it overnight. I'll get back to you in the morning. So he took it home, read it overnight, came back to her in the morning and said, Rebecca, I told you could publish anything you want, but you can't publish this because I can't sell it. There's no category for it on a bookstore shelf. And Rebecca, God bless her, stepped up to the plate and said, publish that book or I quit. And so they published it. And albeit in very, very small quantities. I think there were less than 5,000 copies, which for a book back then, for a book anytime, was not a whole lot. And nowadays, people ask me a lot about if you could live your life over, if you had a time machine and you could go back and change anything, what would you change? And I have one specific goal. I would get in my time machine and I'm gonna go back to 1981 when that book came out, priced at $2.99. And I would buy all 5,000 of them and I would put them in a locker somewhere and then come back to the present, because if you go on eBay now, those books are far north of $400 a piece. Yeah. So, I'd be a very wealthy man.
And you could sign them too.
And I could sign them too. Yeah. So, the book was purchased in 1980, and it was scheduled to come out in 1981 because that's how long it took to publish a book back then. And so in that interim, in 1980, probably February, March, I get a call at home on my home phone. And a guy on the other end says, "Hi, is this Gary K. Wolf?" I said, yes, it is. He says, "Hey, this is Roy Disney from the Disney Company." And I'm like, "Yeah, right. Roy Disney's calling me at home. Get real. So is this really?" And he says, no, it's really Roy Disney. He says, "And I just read your book and I wonder if you'd be interested in having Disney make a movie of your book." I said, "Yeah, right. The book hasn't even come out yet." Well, it turned out that somebody at St. Martin's Press, I never found out who, and believe me, I tried, because I owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude and I wanted to kiss her or him full on the lips. I tried to find out who did it. I never did. But somebody sent it to Disney saying, "We think you'd really like this book and we think it would make a great Disney movie." And, Disney read the book and Disney agreed. In 1980, 81, Disney was a second-rate movie production studio.
Yep.
They were making movies like Flubber, The Nutty Professor, the Black Hole, the Black Cauldron, which disappeared down the black hole. They were making movies that were the bottom half of double features.
Right.
There were no more double features, so they were in danger of going out of business or becoming a really third-rate grindhouse. And they needed something that would catapult them back into the top echelon of movie film production studios. They'd been offered E.T. and they turned it down. They'd been offered Star Wars and they turned it down. Yeah. So they saw Roger Rabbit as being something that could reestablish them as a first-rate movie production house. Plus, I don't know if you notice or not, but when you walk down any city street anywhere in the world, you see a lot of people wearing T-shirts, hats, umbrellas, raincoats with Disney characters on them. They make a lot of money selling merchandise. And in 1980, their stable of characters had gotten kind of weak. They couldn't have fun with Mickey Mouse anymore because he was kind of the corporate spokesmouse, and they couldn't really play with him. They could play with Donald Duck, but nobody could understand what he said, so he didn't really help them much. So they saw Roger Rabbit, Baby Herman, Jessica. They saw those as characters they could use to revitalize their merchandise as well as the movie. And when they said, "Are you willing to let us make a movie of your book?" I really did not think the book was filmable because of, I'm a writer, not a movie maker. And the book was something that was written to be read and to engage a reader's imagination. So you got to you brought something of yourself to it, and you got the jokes because they were in your mind. Like the word balloons, how are you going to do that? And, I just didn't think it was a filmable book. But they paid me more for it than I had made for everything I'd written up to that point put together. So who am I to say no? Yeah, go ahead and try. And, for the first couple of months, first couple of years, actually, they pretty much proved me right. In 1980, 81, 82, 83, 84, they really didn't have the horsepower it took to make that movie. They tried doing live action animation together, and admittedly, in 80, 81, 82, 83, a lot of the technology that they used to make this movie did not yet exist. So they really couldn't do it. A lot of the technology that was used to make Who Framed Roger Rabbit was invented for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and was actually used in other movies while Who Framed Roger Rabbit was being made. And but in the early days, they didn't have that. So one day, Roy Disney came to me and said, we're not having much luck doing this as a live action animated movie. What would you think if instead of real cartoon characters, we used people in costumes like we do at Disneyland? What do you think of that? And I'm thinking, geez, I'm going to get my movie with the Disney stable of characters. I'm going to have Fred McMurray as Eddie Valiant. I'm going to have Haley Mills as Jessica, Dean Jones as the rabbit, and Russell as baby Herman. I said, nah, he said, I think that compromises the principle just a little bit. So
agreed.
Yeah, everybody agreed and they went on, but they really couldn't get it going. And it was like a roller coaster. You come and you go, and they had pretty much gone. I really didn't think they'd ever pull it together. And then in 85, Roy Disney got forced out and Mike Eisner came in.
Right.
And he brought Jeff Katzenberg with him. And of course, the two of them had worked at Paramount, I think.
Yeah, they were Paramount.
Yeah, and had produced a ton of really good big budget movies. And so when they came in, they threw out all the movie projects that Disney had going at the time, because that's what got the previous regime in trouble. And they threw them all out, all except for Roger Rabbit. And both Mike and Jeff said, hey, this is the movie we have to make. So they did something that nobody at Disney had ever done before. They brought in an outside producer, a little known guy named Steve Spielberg. I mean, nobody ever heard of it, but hey, we'll give the kid a break. So, when Steve Spielberg comes in, immediately things start to move. He brought in Bob Zemeckis, and both Stephen and Bob had read the book when it first came out. Stephen just read it because he'd heard it was a good book, and Bob had been offered the directing job on it back in 1981, and thought it would make a great movie, but kind of agreed with me at the time that he didn't think Disney had the horsepower to bring it off. But when they approached him again and said, hey, Steve Spielberg's involved now, he said, yeah, sure. Hey, I'm involved too. So, that's going well. The next thing we have to do now is kind of design the characters. And for that, Steve wanted to bring in a lead animator. The Disney animators were all top of their craft, but he wanted someone to oversee the entire animation staff. And the first person we went to, and then what everybody wanted and what I wanted to, was Chuck Jones, who did Bugs Bunny.
Of course.
And we went to him and talked to him and told him what this project was, and Chuck said, yeah, I'll do it. But Chuck at the time was, I think, late 60s, maybe early 70s, I can't remember. But in a meeting afterwards, everybody said, he's so old, and this is going to be such a high pressure project, that they were worried that the extreme pressure on him over 5 years might kill him. And so they decided not to go with Chuck Jones, which is the only time I've ever seen anybody in Hollywood show any compassion. I mean, usually it is, hey, let them work and let them die at their drug. I actually just one of my favorite animators was a guy named Joe Grant, was the only guy who worked on both Fantasia 1 and Fantasia 2.
Mhm.
And he actually died at 95 at his drawing table at Disney. You know,
Yeah.
it's usually the case. So we then took a look at Ralph Bakshi,
Yep.
who did the animated Fritz the Cat.
Yep.
And I often wondered what Ralph Bakshi would have done with Jessica.
Yeah.
But Stephen thought Ralph was a bit of a goon, so no goons allowed on this project. So then we settled on Dick Williams, who was a perfect choice. He'd won an Academy Award,
Absolutely.
had won an Academy Award for the Pink Panther, and had just finished doing a series of beer commercials for a beer in England. I can't remember the name of the beer, but you can Google them and see them on YouTube. But it's the lead character is a cat who has 9 lives, and he wants a beer, and he keeps trying to get this beer, and every time he's close to getting this beer, something happens to him. He's kind of like the Wile E. Coyote of cats wanting a beer. Something falls on his head, or he falls off a building, and every time this happens, you see a little ticker, and he gets 1 less life. So he starts with 9, and he's down to 1, right?
Yeah.
And he finally at 1 gets his beer. But if you look at those bits, you'll see that the character has and not exact resemblance to Roger, but kind of the same bodily movements as Roger. And a lot of the bits this cat does are bits that you'll see in the Roger Rabbit movie. So Dick Williams came on board and sat down with me to design the characters, because I'm a writer, and I wrote them and I could see them in my head, but I had never drawn them, and I couldn't visualize them. So the rabbit in the book was a brown rabbit, just because Bugs Bunny was gray and Disney had the white rabbit. So, it's a brown rabbit. I'll just sneak a brown rabbit in here. But Dick Williams thought that a white rabbit would pop more off the screen. So he suggested changing the color from brown to white, and I didn't have a problem with that. And he left the red overalls, the polka dot bow tie, all that. He added the orange top knot for a little extra dash of color. And Baby Herman was exactly as he was described in the book. Jessica, I had in my mind, I had based Jessica on a couple of things. Tex Avery's Red Hot Riding Hood from the 40s and 50s, and a couple of Hollywood glamour girls who were my favorites: Veronica Lake, Rita Hayworth, Betty Grable.
Yep.
And Dick got that instantly. He was great with pinups, and so he designed Jessica in the style of Red Hot Riding Hood, and he made her even more disproportionate than Red Hot is. I mean, Red Hot has a tiny waist and big chest and hips, but Jessica more so. And he did that for a very special reason. Dick wanted he wanted this to be a showcase for Disney animation, and he wanted to impress other animators, right? And he wanted other animators to know that Jessica was not rotoscoped, and rotoscoping is a technique that animators use where they film a live person or couple, and then they take that film and they draw over it and turn it into a drawing and a cartoon. Perfectly acceptable animation technique. I mean, they
actually did it quite a bit.
They use it a lot. In Cinderella, the Dancing at the Ball. I think Six Seasons, White.
White too,
but,
yeah.
Yeah, but he wanted people to realize that this was not a real person. This was a total figment of some overheated animator's imagination. The other thing that Dick did to kind of impress other animators, something that he did not have to do. The opening scene from Roger Rabbit is that cartoon. And it's done for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's funny, and it sets the tone of 1947, where every movie started with a cartoon. It also is a device to get you from the live action, from the total animation world to the live action animated world. So it served a lot of purposes. Dick did that entire opening sequence himself, drew every frame for that entire opening sequence. Now, when you
Wow.
look at it, you'll pay attention to the floor, because they're in a kitchen
Mhm.
and the floor
Oh,
is
yes.
black and white tile.
Mhm.
Now, there's no reason and there's no reason why that floor had to be black and white. If that floor had been all white or all black, his animation problem would have lessened logarithmically, because every time, every frame, 24 frames a second, every frame, the perspective changed on every single one of those tiles. So they all had to be redrawn constantly. And then not only did he redraw all the tiles, but Roger is reflected in the tiles.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
it's just a tour de force of animation, and
Amazing.
it didn't have to be done. Would have worked without it, but like I say, everybody was at the top of their craft and
Mhm.
really wanted to do top-notch job.
There-
So
there's so much detail that just makes that movie stand out.
yeah,
more.
absolutely. Yeah, no,
Set the
absolutely.
stage, yeah,
And
for a nation revolution that happened after that. I mean, once you see the possibilities, you go back of even when computer generation stuff came out, you're like, they really tried to hit the top, and they're like, well, this is what we can do. Now we can move from that.
Yeah,
From-
yeah, you know, there's a scene in it, the most famous scene, and the one that animators really marvel at, is when Roger is back in the storeroom of the terminal bar with Eddie, and I think Dolores is back there too.
Mhm.
And Roger's head hits the lamp, and the lamp starts swinging back and forth, and it's casting a shadow as it swings. And if you look, the shadows on Roger and Roger's shadows synchronize with the swinging of the lamp.
Mhm.
I cannot tell you what a difficult job of animation that is.
Oh,
It's
I can
incredibly
imagine.
difficult. And nowadays, whenever animators do a shot that's an especially tough shot, they call that bumping the lamp. Because of that, yeah. But so we had the characters. We found Charlie Fleischer, who was the voice of Roger Rabbit. We found him doing comedy in a comedy club. He's a Robin Williams kind of stand-up comedian.
Yep.
Very, very funny guy. And we saw, as the first routine we ever saw him do, he was doing a voice, and he was doing Donald Duck having an orgasm, which was just hilarious. And so we brought him in, and Dick Williams worked with him, and Dick Williams felt that every major cartoon character had some kind of a speech impediment. So they, Porky Pig with his stutter, and Sylvester the cat with his all of them. So they worked to find something for Roger, and actually Charlie came up with the stuttered P, which was pretty good. And then we wanted somebody for Jessica, of course, and Bob Z had worked with Kathleen Turner on Romancing the Stone.
Yep.
And of course, she was number one on my list. So he asked her if she would do it. And this was early days. I mean, they hadn't shot any film. All they had was a script, and they were just doing the voices. They hadn't even really finalized the animation. They didn't really know exactly what Jessica was going to look like. And so she agreed to do it as a favor to Bob, but said she would do it without taking screen credit, which is what James Earl Jones did with Star Wars when he did Darth Vader, because nobody knew if that was going to be any good. So he did Darth Vader, but didn't take screen credit. That way, if the movie was a flop, well, he could just slink into the shadows. And if it was a big success, he would come forward and say, hey, well, I was the voice of Darth Vader. So she did the same thing. But there came a problem when it came time to record the song, because she couldn't sing. And whether she really couldn't sing or she didn't have birth control, because she was significantly pregnant at the time, and she may just not have had the birth control. I don't know, but she couldn't sing. So we were in the studio, and Steve was there with his wife at the time, Amy Irving. And so Steve said to Amy Irving, he says, hey, you sang in Yentl, why don't you give it a whack? And I said, Steve, nobody's going to believe that Jessica has one voice when she sings and a totally different voice when she speaks. He said, nobody will even notice it. So much time goes by between one and the other. So Amy Irving sang the song.
Yep.
And if you watch the credits, you will see that Amy Irving took a screen credit. Amy Irving singing voice of Jessica Rabbit. But Kathleen Turner never did. So, the only other major casting decision was, of course, who's going to play Eddie Valiant. And Eddie Valiant was the most critical character in the movie, because it was Eddie who would convince the audience that that rabbit was real. If Eddie could not do that, you'd lose the audience. Their sense of belief would fracture, and you'd lose the audience. So it was very important to get somebody who was a good enough actor that could convince the people that rabbit was real. And also, I mean, this was a risky movie. Nobody really knew if this was going to be a kids movie or an adult movie or what kind of movie this was going to be. So we thought that it would help tremendously if we could get a bankable actor, somebody who could bring people in and fill the seats. So no matter how good the movie was, somebody would come in to see the actor. So they did a lot of screen tests. They tested James Woods and say Kurt Russell. Everybody wanted Harrison Ford. I wanted Harrison Ford, but it was going to take 4 to 5 years, and Harrison Ford couldn't give us that much time, so he couldn't do it. So we wanted Paul Newman, and same deal. I mean, he just couldn't commit that much time. So we're looking at all kinds of different actors. William Peterson, who I think probably would have done a pretty good job. He wasn't that well known and it wasn't that bankable, but I think he would have done a good job. Yeah. But finally, we got the guy that everybody said, "Oh, this guy will be the perfect Eddie Valiant, and he's bankable." So that guy, of course, was Bill Murray. Bill Murray is Eddie Valiant, and 2 weeks of shooting, it becomes obvious that this is a big mistake, because not only can Bill Murray not convince us that the rabbit is real, he doesn't believe it himself. I mean, you're a talking rabbit. And so they paid him off, gave him $1 million to buy him out of his contract. And, we kept looking. So, we're looking at other actors, and finally we get the guy who everybody says, all right, well, not quite what we were looking for, but very bankable star. He'll be a perfect Eddie Valiant. And that, of course, was Eddie Murray. So, now we've got a black
Right.
Eddie Murphy. Yeah, not Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy. And we've got a black Eddie Valiant. And so all of a sudden, we're rewriting the script to make the Eddie Valiant funnier than the Toons. Mm-hmm. And, this isn't going to work either. So Eddie Murphy gets bought out of his contract. He gets $1 million and a Ferrari.
Not a bad deal, I guess.
Yeah. You say you make money in Hollywood, you never work.
But I agree with that. And I thought when I originally read that Eddie Murphy was going to get that role, I'm like, he would have been too funny. I think it would have taken away from the Toons.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was obvious. It was obvious early on that he wasn't going to make it. So, meanwhile, on the other side of town, Brian De Palma is making The Untouchables. Mm-hmm. And he really wants Bobby De Niro to be Al Capone. But De Niro is making another movie, so he's committed. So De Palma hires an English guy named Bob Hoskins to be Al Capone. And so they're like 2 or 3 weeks into the movie when De Niro calls De Palma and says, "Hey, I wrapped early. I can be in your movie after all." So now Bob Hoskins gets fired. He's got $1 million and nothing to do. So they said, "Hey, let's bring Hoskins in and see what he can do." And I mean, of all the people they brought in, I said, "Geez, right. I was a big fan. I had seen even before this, I had seen everything he'd ever done. The Long Good Friday, Mona Lisa, everything he'd ever done. I was a big fan of his. I think he was a fantastic actor. But I said, he's British. I said, and not only is he British, he's Cockney British. I said, how can he bring off the prototypical LA American private eye? Actually, he's not going to be believable. So he came in and did a reading, empty stage, and did it in a perfect American accent. Mm-hmm. Perfect. And standing there on an empty stage, he had you convinced that that rabbit was real. You believed it. There was nothing on that stage but him, but you believed that rabbit was standing there next to him. And you know, people are always, the other thing people are always asking me, they say, well, do you have any regrets about the movie? And yeah, I have one, and it concerns Hoskins. The fact that Hoskins in that movie did the most phenomenal acting job that I have ever seen in my life.
Absolutely.
He was standing in a completely empty warehouse with a green screen, making everything up in his mind and making people believe that all that stuff was there. And he never even got nominated for an Academy Award. I mean, he should have won that award hands down. He was so good. And the guy was just a consummate professional.
Yeah.
When he gets thrown out of the Ink and Pink Club, the gorilla throws him out.
Yeah.
When he lands on a cardboard box. Of course, he was on a wire, and they dropped him, and he dropped into cardboard prop boxes. But still, when he landed, he broke 3 ribs.
Ooh.
So you know, brought a doctor in and said, "Oh, geez, this is it. You know, we're gonna have to stop production for 6 to 8 weeks while Hoskins heals." He came in the next day, taped up, ready to go. Hey, let's go, guys. Just a consummate professional and a wonderful, wonderful guys. I hung around with him a lot when they filmed the movie in London, because Stephen likes the food in London. You know, go figure. No, that's never. They filmed it because Elstree Studios was in London, and Elstree had a 3-story soundstage, and that sort of thing didn't exist in the United States at the time. It does now, but it didn't then. And on the top level were the sets, and then on the second level, the second floor, were the animator. We called them animators, but they were actually guys with things on sticks, and the sticks stuck through the floor above, and they had the guns on them and all the you know, the real stuff that went around. And then on the bottom floor were video monitors, and that's actually where Bob Z hung out. And so he hung out on the bottom floor and watched what was going on with the real objects through the floor and the real actors on the top floor. And then he had animators down there who were going over the video monitors with grease pencil, drawing in what the characters were so that he could see the relationship. And that's really why they, plus it was also convenient for Dick Williams, who had the animation studio over there. Dick hung around every single day and was there every day and was very, very helpful. So, you know, the movie came out in, 1988, June 9th, was it? Yeah.
It was June 21st.
June 21st. Okay, a couple days off. And they premiered it at Radio City Music Hall in New York City, so that I wouldn't have to come to LA, you know, so I could just get on the train and go to New York, which I did. And you know, I am sitting there in the VIP section, which was the first balcony. And I am going to see my movie all the way through, start to finish, for the first time. I'd seen it, you know, I'd been there on the set. I'd seen it made. I'd seen bits and pieces of it, but I'd never seen it all put together. And I was going to see my movie all put together for the first time. I was going to see my credit for the first time. You know, my name on a real movie screen for the very first time. And I was sitting there with Kathleen Turner on my left-hand side and Amy Irving on my right-hand side. So I'm sitting between two of the most beautiful women I've ever met in my life. And I'm going to see my movie. I'm going to see my credit. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, I said, life just doesn't get any better than this.
Right.
And by golly, life got better because Kathleen reached over and put her hand on my knee. And she leaned over and whispered in my ear, she said, "Gary, are you excited?" I said, "Kathleen, you have no idea." So, you know, the movie came out 1988, was the best reviewed movie of the year by far. I mean, it got glowing 5-star reviews.
Yeah, there's a great, if you go on YouTube, you can look up the Siskel and Ebert episode, and it's like a 20-minute episode of them just reviewing
Yeah.
it. Almost like-
Actually, another little fact. But I went to school with Roger Ebert.
Oh,
we
nice.
we were at the University of Illinois together, and we were actually on the staff of the Daily Illini together.
Oh, cool.
And you know, I mean, the movie was going to premiere, and nobody knew, and even I mean, we didn't have an inkling how this movie was going to be reviewed, how it was going to be accepted. And so, I'll be honest with you, the week before the movie premiered, I called up Roger Ebert, and I said, you know, Roger, would you do me a favor as an alum to an alum? Would you at least give my movie a passing review? I mean, you know, he said, oh, we saw a screener before. He said, we're both thumbs up. He said, that's one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life. So, yeah, it was.
That's awesome. And
Yeah,
then
one other thing about that week, about New York City in that week, I understood that there was going to be Roger Rabbit merchandise. And in those days, this was the early days of movie merchandising. Batman kind of set the tone when Batman came out. They did Batman merchandise, and you know, nobody had ever thought about doing merchandise at that level before. And so I understood there was going to be Roger Rabbit merchandise. And so my wife and I went to the premiere. We went to the after party. And the next day, we were in a hotel right across from Radio City. And so the next day I said to my wife, I understand that they've got merchandise at Macy's. We got to go over and see what the merchandise looks like. And I told my wife, I'm going to buy the first piece of Roger Rabbit merchandise I see. Whatever it is, I'm going to buy it. So we went over to Macy's and went into the Macy's, and I went to the young woman at the information desk. I said, do you have Roger Rabbit merchandise here? She says, oh, yes, we do. I said, where is it? She says, second floor. I said, oh, we're on the second floor. She says, no, second floor. So we go up, and the entire second floor is Roger Rabbit merchandise. Yeah. And I was in there wandering around. The first thing I saw was a lunchbox. Unfortunately, I wish it had been, you know, like the life-size Roger Rabbit.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It was a tin lunchbox, which I bought and I still have. But I'm wandering around looking at all this merchandise, and all of a sudden I bump into somebody. I turn around, and it's Charlie Fleischer, who's also up there looking around at all the Roger Rabbit merchandise.
Yeah. Goodness. Now, even years later, you're still seeing Roger Rabbit merchandise being made up to this point. This is a movie that's only had one film, you know, but the legacy of that film is so rooted. I mean, it is so deeply rooted that I think it pays. That's just that one film just was enough.
One film, three cartoons.
Yeah,
but mostly the film. Yeah, and I guess what's amazing to me is, you know, my legacy. Writers are always looking at their legacy. I have created characters, Roger and Jessica especially, who are iconic.
Absolutely.
Jessica Rabbit is viewed as one of the most glamorous women of all time. And I keep saying, you know, she's a cartoon. you know, she can be as attractive as your imagination. But you know, I still people send me stuff all the time, and I get pictures, probably 10 or 15 pictures a week at least, sometimes more, of young women who cosplay Jessica Rabbit, and the variations on it, which I encourage. I mean, the reason why Jessica Rabbit is so iconic and why she's cosplayed so often is because she is not the prototypical willowy film stars that you see today. You know, she's not thin, she's kind of buxom. And so a young woman who maybe wouldn't do that well as Wonder Woman looks really great as Jessica Rabbit, because you know she's got the proportions for it. I'm getting black Jessicas, which I think is great. I've got a whole category of gender bender guys who portray Jessica Rabbit. They call him Jesse Rabbit, which some of those guys are just adorable. I mean, it's great. And you know, oddly, kind of works the other way too. I get a lot of guys playing Roger Rabbit, but also lately, well, not lately, for the past couple of years, I get a lot of young women playing Roger Rabbit. But they play Roger as kind of a sexy rabbit, you know, short shorts. And I look at this, and I look at all the people that send me pictures of their tattoos. I mean, Jessica Rabbit must be tattooed on the arms of half the sailors in the Navy. You know, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, you know, that was me. Yeah, that was me.
Definitely a testament to what you created, and it's lasted this long. And I mean, and watching it in '88, it was nostalgia for us because you got Betty Boop and taking place in the 40s. And now it's nostalgia again because we grew up in the age of Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny. So it always continues to be that our history of what we always carry with us. And like,
you know, that's a really interesting point you raised, because when the movie first came out, my fans, you know, I'd go to autographing, and my fans would be anywhere from, I don't know, 16, 17 up to, you know, adults. And the ones who really got it were the adults who remembered Betty Boop and Daffy Duck and Porky Pig, characters they said really hadn't seen for a while. And then when the movie came out on VHS and later on DVD, people started using it as a babysitter. And so they started showing it to their kids. And all of a sudden my fan base got younger, and I started seeing younger kids. And that's still the way it is today. And it's an interesting point that you just brought up that I hadn't thought about. But, you know, for my generation, at least, when that movie came out, Betty Boop was a nostalgic character. And I knew who Betty Boop was. I mean, I saw Betty Boop and I instantly knew Boop Boopy Doop. I knew that. Kids today have no idea who Betty Boop is. They don't know, but they can still watch that movie and kind of get it in context.
And it's great that they were able to still have Nate Questel do Betty Boop and Mel Blanc. You know, they got him right before, you know, they had passed on.
Yeah, Mel Blanc's, I think this was Mel Blanc's last role, I think.
But it was the Jetsons he was working on when he was recording the Jetsons. But this was like, I mean, the last time he did Bugs Bunny and those characters, I believe. So it's a great way to sort of look back and say, wow, we still had all these original voice actors and everything still performing those characters in this movie. So even more nostalgic dripping out of that.
Absolutely. And you know, now I think Charlie Fleischer now, I think, is approaching the age that Mel Blanc was when he did Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So now even Charlie Fleischer is becoming
Now, just a couple last questions. One, what is your favorite scene from the Roger Rabbit film? If you had one scene, what would you?
No question, my credit. My favorite scene is right at the end of the cartoon and the beginning of the live action sequence, because that's the one where you if you look at the audience when they're seeing it and watch somebody who's seeing it for the first time, that's where their jaw drops and where they go, oh, and they have no idea what has happened and what's going to happen. And there are so many things that go on in that scene, from Roger getting hit, and it establishes Roger's character as a goofy rabbit who can never do anything right. It establishes Baby Herman as a fully grown, oversexed man who's playing a baby.
And I love that they used a line from the book. You know,
I gotta 50-year-old lust and a 3-year-old dinky.
That was
And,
perfect.
yeah, it's perfect. And it also establishes Eddie Valiant, because
Yeah.
you see Bob Hoskins and he reaches in where you expect to see his gun, and he takes out a bottle and takes a drink,
Mhm.
and his only line of dialogue is tunes, and it establishes so much in such a short period of time, that it has to be my favorite scene. Yeah.
It's a great moment.
Yeah.
At every scene. I mean, I love, we haven't even mentioned Christopher Lloyd, who, has such a
Reverend
comedy.
Jim,
But-
his
Wow.
I was the one, I'm a writer, and people always say, oh, it must be exciting being on a movie set. Well, it's really boring, because they do the same scene over and over and over and over. I don't know if everybody does it that way, but Bob Z did. And in the scene where Chris Lloyd is putting on those rubber gloves,
Mhm.
he's putting on the rubber glove, and he cannot get the rubber glove pulled down over all 5 fingers at the same time. Sometimes these 2 fingers, sometimes the middle finger. So he cannot get it, and over and over 1,000 times we did it, and before we did it right. Interesting when the red shoe. I'm going to talk about the red shoe, because the red shoe has become kind of an iconic character too. If you look at the movie, you'll see that the red shoe was actually who kicked he kicked the policeman in the groin earlier on, and so he wasn't entirely blameless. And there is a group that has grown up, actually a very large group, called Justice for the Red Shoe. And they
That's hard to watch. Yeah, I mean that's
yeah, it's hard. I mean, that scene, and the one where Chris Lloyd's eyes spin around.
Yes, love that moment.
People tell me that those are the 2 most traumatic scenes from their childhood of any movie they saw as a child, because we were originally going to use a puppy instead of the red shoe. We're going to use a puppy, and we finally realized that might just be a little bit over the top. So we used the red shoe. But now there are people who have a group called Justice for the Red Shoe, and they have made me promise on my honor, and I will honor this promise, that if and when we do a sequel, that I will bring back the red shoe. The red shoe will return. And I keep telling them, yes, the red shoe will return. So
Yeah, and even Christopher Lloyd not blinking is such a great touch.
Through the whole movie.
Yeah, not blink, just to make sure.
His eyes must have been
I could
like 2 swollen red olives or something.
How wonderful performance again too. Any other questions? I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add, or.
Well, I got something. I'll announce this because my pandemic book for the 2 years I was isolated, I wrote a Jessica Rabbit novel.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, it's called Jessica Rabbit Serious Business, and it's spelled XCRIOUS, Serious Business. And it is an origin story. It talks about how Jessica Rabbit went from being a rather plain shop girl named Jessica Krupnik to living in a world where tunes don't exist, to becoming Jessica Rabbit. Talks about how she met Roger, where tunes come from, and how Toontown came to be.
Excellent.
Total origins book. And because I'm a man, not much of a man, but I tick all the boxes. So I felt a little worried about writing a book about a woman because I did not want to trivialize her. I did not want it because she's a strong, independent, woman who can hold her own in a world full of men. And I did not want to make her anything less than that. And I did not want to make her a sex object or the object of, ribald comments. So I I put a lot of work into making her a real woman with real strong personality and realistic characteristics. And I gave the book to 40 beta readers, and they were all women, because I wanted a woman's perspective.
Mhm.
And I gave it to a lot of people who have read my stuff before and didn't like it. And the responses from my beta readers were overwhelming. They all said, yeah, the typical comment, and I got this more than once, was, yeah, this is the kind of woman that I've always wanted to be. So
Looking forward to it.
yeah, yeah. So that's coming next month, actually. And an interesting sidelight on the cover, because of licensing arrangements, Disney and Spielberg own the likenesses of those characters.
Correct. Yep.
So I cannot use the likenesses of those characters on the cover of my book. I can write about them all I want to, but I can't use the likenesses on the covers without Disney and Spielberg's permission, which usually they've been very happy to give me. I mean, they did it on my second book, and they've done it on a number of other projects I've done. But because in this book, Jessica Rabbit is human. She's not Jessica Rabbit. She eventually becomes Jessica Rabbit, but she is not Jessica Rabbit. I didn't want to use the Jessica Rabbit image on the cover of the book, but I still wanted to connote Jessica Rabbit. So, how do you do that? Well, oddly, I was looking around for somebody to help me out. I had an artist who, wasn't very helpful, but over the transom, a fan sent me a drawing, and he said, "Hey, I did this, and I wondered if you'd put it on your Facebook page." And it was a kind of a Picasso Matisse deconstructed image of Jessica Rabbit. Yeah. And I wrote him back and I said, not only will I put it on my Facebook page, I'm going to put it on the cover of my book. I said, this is fantastic. And the guy's name is Andy Prisney. He is an artist. I know almost nothing about him except his work is just sensational. He's on Facebook all the time, and he publishes 3 or 4 line drawings a day sometimes, and they're all incredible. But I think that the fans will be kind of taken by the fact that the cover of the book is fan art. Done by a guy who was just a fan who sent me a drawing, and I put it on the cover of the book.
Oh, that's got to be
So,
a good feeling for him too.
Yeah, you can follow my my webpage, which is www.garrettwolf.com, and you will find out when that's coming, or follow me on Facebook, because I'm going to be announcing it there too.
Oh, excellent. Oh, it's very exciting. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us all this insight. I mean, so much wonderful stories from such a wonderful film.
Oh, I'm telling you, I'm so happy to have been a part of it.
I can imagine. Yeah. What a great way to see your vision sort of come to life in a unique way. It's great stuff. So thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, great. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Okay, take care now.
Thank you.
All right.